What is up, YouTube? My name is Paige and I am very excited to start this new video with you where we are going to choose random books that I've placed into these boxes in this bowl to decide what next 4 books we are going to read. I'm going to choose from 4 categories. This one is books I've found on the internet. These are recommended by Book Talk or BookTube or Bookstagram or wherever. And I'll add to this list as I hear more recommendations by people I enjoy. Ooh, this one's super full. This one is classics. Classics that I've never read. I did my degree in French language and literature. These are English classics. I did take a lot of English courses at university, but these are the ones that I never got to, so it's jam-packed. This one's random TBR. This is just like, as I find books that I want to read, they're gonna go in this box. Finally, this bowl. This bowl represents all the new books that I've discovered that sound interesting and that came out either this year, 2024, or in the second half of last year, 2023. So today we are going to choose one book from each of these categories and we are going to read that book. This video is also going to be reviews for those books. Category number 1, random. Random is my own selection of books, so let's see. Ooh, American Gods by Neil Gaiman, 2001. I read Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman and honestly haven't heard anything about this book other than it's amazing. Alrighty, let's go for book number 2. Book number 2, Internet. It says booktube. I don't know if you can see that. It's just like the little tag says booktube. Okay. The next book we are going to read is what is this? 5-Star Weekend by Elin Hilderbrand. It came out in 2023. Book number 3. Alrighty, this is going to be the classic. The classic from the middle. It's so full. Ah, I breathed one out. Does that count? I don't think so. Don't look. Don't look. Our third book. Ooh, it's small. Oh my god. Okay, our next book is The Godfather by Mario Puzo from 1969. Is this a classic? Honestly, didn't even know this was a book.
You uncultured swine!
Until I made this list. And I forgot since I made the list. So I'm just in the middle of editing this video and I just realized that the 4th clip that I had of selecting the book just doesn't exist. I just don't have one. So I have the proof, I guess, of the selection that I made, and it is in the form of this piece of a post-it note. The last book that I chose from the new category was The Invisible Hour by Alice Hoffman, and it came out in 2023, so that is the 4th book that I read in the month of March. So I'm on vacation in Vancouver and I just finished The Godfather, but just look at that view. Look at the boats. Okay, so let's get into the review. So this is the first classic I'm reading this year, and The Godfather was different than any book I think that I've ever read. Didn't know it was a classic to begin with. I've never seen the movies. I've heard a lot about them and I've interviewed my fiance about them. So The Godfather is about the Italian-American mafia family headed by Don Vito Corleone, and they run New Jersey, most of New York, and they have tendrils of power that reach throughout the United States. It's set in the 60s. Part of it is set even before the Second World War. So there's some very dated language and some very dated views shared in this book, but it is true to the time and to the setting in which the book takes place. It's medium paced throughout, and it really picks up and rolls at the end when all of the characters' stories are wrapped up with a real sense of urgency. If you're expecting the movies, you're not getting them. The vibes on board this book are much darker and then at the same time more vibrant in the lighter parts of the book with way more humor than should be possible with themes explored in this story. Also, the famous scenes that are quoted most often aren't written that way in the book. It's not a critique, it's just an FYI if you're looking to read this book already knowing the movies or already being familiar with the story, with the themes are here quoted a lot and are expecting to see those quotes in this book. All the same characters are in this book, though. You still get all the sons. You get Michael, you get Sonny, you get Fredo, although Fredo's like not in the book very much. He's like a side character, but really I don't think he's like a fan favorite in the movies anyway, so anyway, enough about the film connection. The major theme explored in The Godfather is respect, but respect is explored in a very uncomfortable way. Like if you downloaded a trigger warning list, you could check off everything on that list in this book. So to think of these characters as driven by respect is a hurdle, but it's definitely how Mario Puzo frames every scene in this book. All of the lead up, all of the plot, every word is chosen to center around the theme of respect, and respect in the viewpoint of the characters in this book. That being said, the characters in this book discuss and perpetrate SA and DA like every 10 pages. And it is encouraged by the men and accepted by the women as a balancing point for power and power dynamics socially and politically in the climate of this book. But that's just it. It's the world of the mafia, pre and post World War II. And Mario Puzo is trying to give us an unadulterated view of that. And he does. For example, at one point in this book, a woman is forced to incinerate a newborn baby. But even that didn't seem gratuitous. Every single green tag I put in this book as I annotated it was a moment that elicited a deep feeling of disgust in me. And even that disgusting violence earned its place in this book. Also, Mario Puzo has never heard of a loose end. He has never heard of a forgotten character. Everything in this book was tied up by the end. Every itch was scratched. Like, even a couple of things that initially bothered me when they were mentioned over and over again, like how often it was said and how adamant Puzo was that Sonny had a big package, or like how many times a woman got excited and her breasts just seemed to grow magically. Even those anatomical anomalies that seemed like unjustified or flagrant came back as important plot points. It was just good writing. But that doesn't say that I wasn't disturbed or that it wasn't disturbing. This book in no way develops characters to be likable. If anything, the main characters' flaws are revealed chapter by chapter, which makes you understand their perspective and elevates your sympathy for their frustrations, but it does not make you love them. I did not love any of the characters in this book. If you're looking to read something that makes you reconsider your perception of the social and political structure of America in the 1960s, this might be it. But I would say that if you haven't read a book like this that is tragic in the way that this is tragic, where the characters are not likable, where they are almost all villains, essentially, morally, humanly, they are villains, they're bad guys. Expect this book to take you longer than most 450-page reads. I had to sit with my feelings a lot during this book and reflect on my lack of knowledge of this kind of world, and it was a lot. And that being said, if blatant misogyny, mentions of SA and DA handled in not at all a sensitive way is not your thing, or if that pulls you out of a book, this is not going to be your bag. I would avoid it. And as much as I liked it, it's not a perfect book. It isn't. The ending that was so rushed and wrapped up so quickly definitely could have been executed differently. I don't know how, but he's a good writer and it definitely could have run as smoothly as the rest of the book. But in my opinion, there's no doubt that The Godfather has earned its classic designation. It's fantastic. It was one of those books that as I was reading it, I could not stop annotating it. Like it was begging me to write an essay about it. Nerd. But 4 stars. All right, so I am still on vacation in Vancouver, so this next read is extra appropriate. This is The 5-Star Weekend by Elin Hilderbrand. Elin Hilderbrand is quite an established author in the contemporary world. I'd never heard of her, but I've read a lot about her now. She has quite a big following. She writes a lot about Nantucket, and if you like Elin Hilderbrand, this is on brand. Ugh. The 5-Star Weekend introduces us to Hollis Shaw. She is a food vlogger and a food influencer in her 50s. She gets popular during the pandemic, and we meet her on the morning that her husband dies in a car accident. She's convinced that they're bound for divorce by the last words he says to her, and this destroys her, and she is broken after his death in her mourning in more ways than one. The most striking of which is the deterioration of her relationship with her daughter. So 6 months later, desperate for connection and feeling very alone, Hollis invites 4 friends to her second home in Nantucket, where they have what is called a 5-star weekend. It's dubbed that by another article about grief that Hollis reads, and she thinks it sounds amazing. You invite 4 friends from the 4 stages of your life: your childhood, your teen years, your middle age, and the prime of your life. She hires her daughter to film the weekend, and that's the main premise. But the plot is driven by the fact that all 4 women, including Hollis's daughter Caroline and Gigi, this woman that she's just met online and is yet to meet IRL, have some huge things going on in their lives. And this book, as you can tell by the cover, is contemporary fiction. Did I think it was a romance? Yes. Am I disappointed that it wasn't? No. Should the single woman on the cover have given me some clues? Probably. If you've read any Elin Hilderbrand before, from what I've read, if you like her books, if you like her style, and if you like the content of her books, like this is not going to disappoint. This is a good Elin Hilderbrand book, and it should be right up your alley. Right off the hop, the prologue got me interested. I was intrigued because it's written in first person plural, the we being the collective Nantucket. We were bothered that Hollis no longer acted or seemed like a local, or that she came to the island only during the summer months and stroll, with the occasional Thanksgiving and daffodil weekend thrown in. The honest answer to that question was this: some of us were bothered, while others were just happy that she was happy. We were all, however, quick to claim Hollis as our own when she became internet famous. It then falls into free indirect discourse, which is the style that Jane Austen writes in, where you get everybody's perspective without having it being written in first person. And genuinely, because this book is the melding of 6 women's stories, it totally plays right into that style of writing. Good writer, there's no denying that, but I almost stopped reading after the first 20 pages because Hollis's daughter Caroline is insufferable. Like, granted, she is a 20-year-old going through some traumatic grief, but she is given no redeeming quality for the first chunk of the book. Like, her only function at the beginning of this book seems to be endearing us to Hollis, but I wanted to throttle this girl straight into therapy. And with her mother's status and her wealth, there's no question that that's what would have happened if this book was real life, but of course it isn't, and the plot needs to be driven, so she doesn't go to therapy, and we have that resolved in other ways. In terms of plot, there are 6 stories, 1 for each of the women on the 5-star weekend and Caroline. But the one that kept me coming back and the one I found most interesting was the cancelled sports manager, Druanne, and I didn't connect to any of the other characters. Hers was just a cool story that I wanted to continue reading, and that is really what got me to finish this book. And saying I wasn't connected to any of these characters really comes from the fact that this book is not written for me. I am not the target demographic. The dialogue was cringy, bet, they said, and Druanne brandishes her credit card like the girl boss she used to be. And the themes that revolved around body image and socioeconomic standing were too shallow and honestly too neatly resolved for my liking. It's getting 3 stars from me. I read it on vacation, and it is a completely palatable vacation read. Alright, so I finished Neil Gaiman's American Gods. And this is what I thought. This is a road trip across America gone rogue type of plot. Shadow is our main character, and he is released from prison days after finding out that his wife has died in a car accident. And he takes a plane home only to meet this mysterious man whose name is Wednesday that seems to know a lot about him for absolutely no reason, and he offers him a job. Hesitant and scared, Shadow, who is super handsome and tall and smart, and we find that out because Neil Gaiman tells us over and over again that Shadow's gray eyes are beautiful and all the women in this book want to be with him, accepts a position with Mr. Wednesday as his assistant / bodyguard, and they make their way across America. And we enjoy the rest of the story with slowly dissipating character irony on Shadow's part, which honestly was like one of my favorite parts about this book. We know a little bit more than Shadow throughout the whole plot, and it just really drove the story forward for me. And I thought it was a really interesting way of exploring the historical significance of gods and having that set in a modern world where the protagonist really knows very little about what's going on helps us to understand what is otherwise quite dense material. I don't know what it would be like to have like a deep knowledge of world religions or Norse, Greek, Roman mythologies, because we get a lot of that in this book, but you really need none of that knowledge to enjoy what happens throughout the plot and this adventure. In terms of reading experience, this was definitely a book that made me forget that I was reading, or gave me that feeling of kind of like watching a movie in my mind. And I think that has a lot to do with the way that it's written, using that character irony. And I think it's my favorite example of that in a text that I've read. Shadow is very aware that his world is being turned upside down, but he has no idea why for most of the story, and he's putting the pieces together slowly, but it's frustrating and confusing, and he just kind of goes with the flow because he feels like he has nothing to lose. And really, we're right there with him, wanting to know what's going to happen next, but just trying to enjoy the experience and try to make the best of it. I feel Shadow told her, like, I'm in a world with its own sense of logic, its own rules. Like when you're in a dream and you know there are rules you mustn't break, but you don't know what they are and what they mean. I have no idea what we're talking about or what happened today or pretty much anything since I got out of jail. I'm just going along with it, you know? Now, I did annotate this book a lot, and a lot of it had to do with the dialogue. And the dialogue is, like I said, literary, but it's also eloquent and informal, formal, with a lot of colloquialisms tossed in. So it ends up being this like kind of mishmash. It is also just as absurd as you would want dialogue to be for gods who've lived for thousands of years and grown into modern society, having to adapt their language and their vocabulary. Wednesday snorted. Sure as eggs, he says, as the turkey farmer said when he hatched his first turtle. Ah, success. And from the bottom of a pocket, he produced a small piece of white chalk. Like, it's wacky. Now, I did read the author's cut, which Neil Gaiman says is 12,000 words longer than the original edition of this book. And I felt that. I felt that occasionally. Not a lot, and not to a negative degree, but I definitely felt it. Like, for the most part, this book is fast/medium pace, and it felt quite fast. Like, I read it in a week, and I am not a quick reader, so that's pretty quick. The main themes in this book are war, sacrifice, the greater good, and questioning reality, and it all comes to a head with a civil war between old and modern gods, or like 21st century gods. There are interludes throughout this book that I know have been polarizing for some people on the internet, but they are the sections that really, to me, explored those themes in a way that, yes, deviated from the plot, but really fleshed out the world to me in a way that made me feel like I was part of this world. The interludes are stories of mythology or are glimpses into the lives of gods that we don't see in any other parts of the book. that give us a more global sense of what significance or insignificance these gods have in the modern America that we have shadow exploring in the main plot of the book. And the most poignant and like punchy sections about war are in those interludes. Wars are being fought all the time, with the world outside no more the wiser. The war on crime, the war on poverty, the war on drugs. This war was smaller than those, and huger, and more selective, but it was as real as any. And just like the punchiness of these lines, you see the outcome of the battle is unimportant. What matters is the chaos and the slaughter. This book was an easy 4.5 stars for me. It wasn't perfect. It was really perfectly right up my alley, but I know that it is a polarizing text. And the two other texts that I would compare it to are, in terms of content and vibe, the Dark Tower series by Stephen King, especially the second and third book. If you liked those books, this is a recommended read for you, and I'd be surprised if you haven't already read it. I hadn't, but I'm not everyone. And if you enjoyed the feeling you got from reading The Handmaid's Tale, but were looking for something that wasn't necessarily feminist, this is an interesting read as well. It has a lot of the same world building. If you've read a lot of Margaret Atwood and Stephen King, Neil Gaiman is another famous world builder, and he does so in a way that isn't necessarily completely fantastical like other famous world builders like Brandon Sanderson, and his writing style is very accessible and often faster paced than some other world builders. I wasn't planning on filming this right now, but I am trying to come up with something coherent to say about The Invisible Hour by Alice Hoffman. And I was trying to write it down, trying to come up with like a good opinion, a well-rounded one. I read The Invisible Hour by Alice Hoffman. I also listened to the audiobook version of The Scarlett Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne. I actually quite enjoyed The Scarlet Letter, and as I was listening to it, I thought maybe that I'd read it before, not as an audio, but so we'll start there. The Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne, if you don't already know the story, it's very commonly referenced. A woman named Hester Prynne who lives in Puritan, Massachusetts in the United States in like the 1600s, and she is found guilty of adultery and has a baby from an affair that she has with an unknown man who she refuses to reveal the name of. She's been married in England and is now in the United States away from her husband, and that's proof enough for her Puritan community to banish her to the woods where she lives out her life with her daughter, who's like genuinely funny. It's in a cottage, just subsisting and coming to the town when they need to. They're accepted as useful members of society. She is a seamstress and she's well sought after, and we kind of just follow their story as free-spirited couple of girls living in the woods. We also follow the story of the clergyman in the town. There's some very obvious like foreshadowing. There's no real plot twist, although it reads as though it was supposed to be a plot twist when it was written, but to our standards now, there is no plot twist. But I won't reveal anything more than that. The Scarlet Letter is the letter A that Hester Prynne has to wear embroidered on her clothing at all times to remind herself and all of her fellow Massachusetts citizens that she is in fact an adulterer or an adulteress and should not be trusted, and that is her, and that's just her punishment for the rest of her life. Now I read that book, gave it a solid 3 on Goodreads, maybe a 3.5. I might go back and change that. I enjoyed it, and honestly I will go back and read that book again and probably like annotate it heavily, just because Nathaniel Hawthorne is an interesting writer. He's an interesting cat, and these characters that he created are deep and layered and nuanced, and it's a really funny book. So I'll definitely go back and read that at some point. This book, however, I will not. Not because it's terrible. It is a well-written book.
in a lot of ways. There's some beautiful prose in here. Alice Hoffman is definitely an author who is respected among other authors. Her craft as a writer is well honed. She chooses her words very carefully, and she writes in a very beautiful way. I enjoyed reading this book for the most part. The Invisible Hour is about a girl whose name is Maya. At the beginning of the book, we're actually introduced to her mother, Ivy, who is pregnant with Maya and becomes a runaway because her family does not accept that having a baby at this time in her life as a young person who has not yet graduated high school is going to allow her to succeed in any way. And she ends up joining a cult. She marries the cult leader, and they raise this child as part of this oppressive patriarchal cult. And it is, of course, a horrible story about the oppression of women's agency, etc. They aren't allowed to read in this cult, and Maya becomes obsessed with books. And we follow Maya's trajectory towards being an avid reader, and what that means for her, and what that means for her redevelopment of agency. Particularly, she is interested in the work of Nathaniel Hawthorne. The book, The Scarlett Letter, is what she considers to be her saving grace. And the plot of this book evolves into a time travel plot. I don't think I'm revealing too much saying that. I feel like if you're going to read this book, you would know that already. And I think that if you are going to read this book, you should know that. I had a sense that it was going to be time travel, but how explicit and unthoughtful the time travel was in this book made me sad. I picked up this book in a physical copy because I thought I was going to annotate it. Like, I'm sure I will my future copy of The Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne. However, I made no marks in this book. None whatsoever. No dog ears, no nothing. And I'm regretting it now because I want to go back and find the pieces of this book that I thought were absolutely ridiculous. There are essentially 3 stories in this book. Her story that revolves around her father, her story that revolves around 2 librarians, and then her story that revolves around Nathaniel Hawthorne. The central story, the one that revolves around Nathaniel Hawthorne, is the one that intrigued me the least. Like, the least, to the point where I was like hoping that those sections were going to end. And the prose in those sections changes. She doesn't write in the way that Nathaniel Hawthorne writes. We're definitely given a sense that those chapters are taking place in a time much earlier than the rest of the book. If this wasn't going to be part of this video, I think I would have DNF'd this book, but I wanted to get, and I'm happy I did. Honestly, the ending of this book was worth it, and I actually quite enjoyed the ending, and I'm very thankful that it ended the way it did, because otherwise I would have felt like it was a waste of time. However, I will read another Alice Hoffman. Like, I liked her style. I did find myself like glazing over a few times and like not actually understanding the words that I was reading, but those were only the passages that were about Nathaniel Hawthorne. It's so hard for me to give this a bad review. Like, it is definitely not a 2-star. This is getting a solid 3-star from me, but I don't not recommend this book. This book would be enjoyed by people who possibly have not read an Alice Hoffman book before, because I've heard she's actually incredible, and this is one of her least popular books. If you like Nathaniel Hawthorne, if you got like super into The Scarlet Letter, which I know a lot of people did in high school, this will probably be fun. And like Stephen King enjoyed it. The vibes in this book are heartwarming, frustrating, and creepy. Like, there's some real creepy sections in this book, and she writes creepy really well. Those were definitely my favorite parts of this book, the creepy vibes. But otherwise, it was just kind of meh. And I'm just now realizing that that's it for this video. Thank you so much for joining me along this March TBR journey. I found some new authors that I enjoyed and read some books that I'll remember for a long time. So join me next time. I am currently listening to a bunch of audiobooks that I will be reviewing in my next video, and I'm really looking forward to releasing that for you as well. All memoirs and autobiographies by famous folks that we know and love or don't know. And I read books. No, thank you so much for sticking to the end, and I hope to see you back soon. Bye.